Welcome to U.S. Power Insight channel, where we bring you the raw, unfiltered truth from the front lines of global conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, has the Middle East just crossed the point of no return? Last night, the skies above the region were ripped open by a ferocious storm of crimson fire. On day 38 of this devastating war, what began as calculated strikes spiraled into an all-out collective slaughter on a scale so shocking it has left the entire world holding its breath. 1,200 precision guided bombs from America's most advanced flying fortresses slammed into Iran's strategic heart, carving out craters of death across key military bases. Many thought this would be the blow that finally broke Iran, but instead, Tehran delivered a savage counterstrike. 800 ballistic missiles and 1,000 suicide UAVs transformed the night sky over Tel Aviv into a blazing inferno of flames and chaos. And the nightmare didn't stop there. Giant American oil tankers now drift like ghost ships in the Strait of Hormuz, floating graves in the middle of the ocean. This is no longer a limited conflict. It has become a reckless, irreversible gamble in which Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran are all desperately pushing their own futures straight into the fire. But beyond the shocking numbers, one brutal question hangs over everything. Who is really in control of this merciless game? Are the 1,200 American bombs enough to crush Iran's spirit once and for all, or have they only awakened a fury that can no longer be contained? Are Tehran's 800 missiles and 1,000 kamikaze drones the final desperate scream of a nation backed into a corner, or a deadly, precise dagger aimed at the heart of Western arrogance? And most critically, when those multi-billion-dollar U.S. oil tankers sink to the bottom of the sea, what kind of terrifying new world order will collapse along with them? In today's report, we won't just deliver dry battlefield updates. We will cut through the rubble in Isfahan and Tel Aviv to expose the hidden truth. This war has become a mutual suicide pact, a conflict where no matter how overwhelming America's firepower or how unbreakable Iran's will, real winner emerging from the ashes may be death itself. For days, the Iranian homeland endured one of the most ferocious aerial bombardments in modern history. Wave after wave of American and Israeli precision strikes turned vast stretches of the country into a landscape of fire and ruin. More than 1,200 high-tech bombs rained down relentlessly, targeting not only military installations but also critical civilian infrastructure that kept the nation functioning. Nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordo were battered repeatedly by massive bunker-busting bombs. Entire underground complexes, once considered impregnable, collapsed into smoking craters. Strategic missile bases, air defense systems, and command centers of the Revolutionary Guard were shattered one after another. Power plants exploded in massive fireballs, plunging major cities, including Tehran and Isfahan, into total darkness for days. Oil refineries that formed the backbone of Iran's economy burned uncontrollably, sending thick black smoke billowing into the sky for hundreds of kilometers. Roads and bridges were reduced to rubble. Water treatment facilities and communication networks were crippled. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded, while medicine and electricity ran dangerously low. Millions of ordinary Iranians found themselves without power, clean water, or reliable food supplies. The economic damage was staggering. Entire industrial zones that took decades to build were wiped out in a matter of hours. The scale of destruction was overwhelming. Iran's leadership watched as layers of its carefully constructed defensive network were systematically peeled away. Many analysts believe the country was on the verge of collapse, its back pushed hard against the wall, with no room left to maneuver. The message from Washington and Tel Aviv seemed clear: surrender or be driven back to the Stone Age. Yet instead of breaking this unprecedented level of devastation, only fueled a deep burning rage within the Iranian people and its military. Western arrogance was on full display in the belief that overwhelming firepower could subdue the will of a people long accustomed to living under pressure and siege. Each bomb, worth millions of dollars, was not only meant to destroy missile launchers, but also carried a cold warning to the entire Islamic world. Major cities such as Tabriz were plunged into darkness as the national power grid collapsed, replaced only by the fierce red glow of blazing strategic stockpiles. The scene forces us to ask, is this a military campaign or a systematic destruction of infrastructure designed to set Iran back by decades? Tehran's night sky no longer shone with city lights. Only giant columns of fire rose toward the clouds, With maximum intelligence support from Washington, Israel poured all its strength into this opening blow. However, in war, arrogance is often the beginning of irreversible mistakes. The Pentagon believed that after this storm, Iran would be left paralyzed, a nation whose fighting spirit had been completely shattered. They expected Tehran to kneel before its own ruins. But the battlefield always delivers a harsh dose of reality to cold calculations. History has shown that when a people are driven to the edge, they do not choose submission, but instead unleash their most ferocious counterattack. Although the bombs destroyed many logistics centers and severed some supply lines, turning numerous Iranian units into isolated pockets of resistance amid the flames, the U.S. had carefully timed the assault while Iran was still repositioning forces to create maximum chaos. Yet they overlooked the most critical factor, the unbreakable will of a nation that cannot be measured by UAV sensors or satellite images. While meetings in Washington began declaring the operation a success deep within Iran's vast mountain ranges, another force was quietly awakening. Missile cities buried hundreds of meters underground, places even the heaviest bunker busters could barely reach, began activating their counterattack procedures. Iran had been preparing for this exact scenario for more than 4 decades with astonishing patience. The 1,200 bombs may have damaged surface infrastructure and disrupted frontline units, but they also inadvertently lit the fuse for the colossal rage of the Iranian people. Tehran's frightening silence in the early hours was not a sign of defeat, but rather the calm moment of a warrior loading a bullet into the chamber. Every bomb that fell on Isfahan only deepened national pride and fanned the flames of defiant resolve. Many military experts have begun warning that this flattening strike may deliver a short-term technical victory, but represents a dangerous strategic blunder because it has pushed a regional power into a position with no retreat, precisely when Iran becomes most formidable. While the dust from the 1,200 bombs still hung thick in the sky, Israeli warning radars suddenly detected unusual signals. Rows of underground Iranian missile silos opened their hatches, simultaneously signaling a region-shaking counterstrike. The seemingly overwhelming position of the U.S.-Israel coalition began to waver as they realized that firepower alone cannot destroy the root of this war, the will of a people to defend their sovereignty. The game has now shifted from one-sided dominance to direct confrontation. Only the side that proves more enduring and resilient will have any chance of survival. Enraged Iran strikes back. 800 missiles and 1,000 suicide UAVs rise from the earth. Instead of bowing before the rubble, Iran flung open the gates of hell from missile cities buried deep beneath the mountains, places even America's most powerful bunker busters could not reach. An unprecedented large-scale counteroffensive was triggered. On Israeli air defense radar screens appeared a horrifying sight: 800 ballistic missiles and 1,000 suicide UAVs launched simultaneously into the night sky. Like fiery ghosts rising from the ground, they formed a steel storm sweeping straight toward their targets. This was not a symbolic retaliation, but a deliberate effort to overwhelm the enemy's entire defense system through sheer numbers. Iran employed a saturation tactic, using overwhelming quantity to push Israel's already strained Iron Dome, David's sling, and arrow systems beyond their limits. When thousands of objects hurtled in at extreme speeds, every algorithm, classification process, and interception effort was driven to the point of collapse. The cunning of Tehran's strike lay in the perfect coordination between low altitude and high altitude layers. The 1,000 next generation suicide UAVs, small in size and flying close to the ground, created an enormous screen of chaos. They swarmed radar stations and air defense positions like swarms of steel hornets, forcing Israel to expend multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles to destroy drones worth only tens of thousands. It was a cold economic chess game. Iran used low-cost assets to rapidly deplete Tel Aviv's strategic missile stockpiles in just hours. And right behind that UAV swarmed the 800 monstrous medium-range ballistic missiles, such as the Fatah and Khaybar Shekin, began their descent. Their greenish trails tore through the atmosphere, hurtling directly toward the Nevatim and Tel Naf air bases, from which the F-35S that had bombed Iran had taken off. This was no longer mere media posturing. It was a direct counterblow on enemy soil. Air raid sirens wailed across Jerusalem, and what had once been drills now became the terrifying sound of a real war earthquake. Chaos began spreading rapidly inside Israeli command centers. Despite possessing one of the world's most advanced defense networks, the simultaneous arrival of 1,800 flying targets overwhelmed every computer system. Iranian missiles with separating warheads pierced the defensive fire net and slammed into critical infrastructure. Refineries near the Mediterranean coast erupted in massive fires, turning the shoreline into a sea of raging red flames. This was the cold declaration of a nation pushed to its limit. If the enemy wanted to drag Iran back to the Stone Age, Iran was ready to pull its foes down into its own hell of war. The counterstrike also carried deep political meaning. Tehran wanted to prove that America's so-called absolute dominance in the Middle East was nothing more than a fragile shell. As the sky filled with UAVs and missiles, confidence in Washington's protective umbrella began to crack. America's regional allies watched every radar signal in shock, realizing that even after absorbing 1,200 bombs, Iran still possessed the strength to launch a counterattack that shook the entire region. Day 38 of the war showed that nowhere is truly safe anymore. U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria also came under threat as Iranian cruise missiles slipped past multiple air defense systems to reach their targets. Tehran has entered an unrestricted war ready to sacrifice everything for a deterrent response. They had prepared for this moment over 4 decades by building an enormous underground logistics network, ensuring that even if the surface was devastated, the flow of missiles would continue surging from beneath the earth. This swarm tactic revealed a bitter truth to the West. Sometimes high technology must yield to boldness and overwhelming numbers. Israel has excellent pilots and advanced radars, but it does not have infinite interceptor missiles. One Arrow missile costs around $3.5 million, while an Iranian UAV costs only tens of thousands. A simple calculation that is enough to shake any war economy. This is a war of attrition in which ammunition stockpiles and budgets will decide who ultimately collapses. When the final missiles of the counterattack wave struck, the entire Middle East fell into an eerie silence. It was not peace, but merely the pause between two storms. The 800 missiles and 1,000 UAVs had succeeded in shattering Israel's myth of invulnerability and dragging America deeper into a quagmire of fire. Later satellite images showed runways at Nevatim torn apart and hangars for stealth aircraft burning fiercely. Iran may be wounded, but it has not bowed its head. The underground counterstrike has upended all of the Pentagon's calculations. Those who once boasted they would end the war in days now face a far harsher reality. Iran is not Iraq, and it is not Afghanistan. Iran is a missile power with an extremely sharp doctrine of asymmetric warfare. While the coalition's 1,200 bombs destroyed physical assets, Tehran's 1,800 weapons delivered a powerful blow to Western dominance, forcing them into a confrontation where death lurks in every direction. If the land was the testing ground for smart bombs and ballistic missiles, then the ocean, especially the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, has become a vast graveyard for hegemonic ambitions. Iran played its sharpest strategic card from its asymmetric warfare doctrine, tightening its grip on the world's energy jugular. They did not need to defeat the entire U.S. carrier fleet in a conventional naval battle. They only needed to turn these waters into a death zone where any vessel flying the stars and stripes could face destruction in an instant. Newly decoded satellite images show numerous giant American and Allied oil tankers burning fiercely on the surface like badly wounded whales. This was no accident or technical failure. Tehran deployed swarms of high-speed attack boats combined with high-speed anti-ship missiles and new-generation smart naval mines. Those oil tankers worth hundreds of millions of dollars carrying the economic lifeblood of the West have been reduced to blackened steel hulks, drifting amid thick smoke that blots out the horizon. Iran has proven a cold truth: when pushed to the limit, they are willing to choke off the entire energy bloodstream of the world. Thousands of coalition bombs may shake the land, but they cannot stop the silent mines lying at the bottom of the deep sea. Washington once had absolute faith in its ability to secure sea lanes, but now it faces the cunning naval guerrilla tactics of the IRGC. Iranian special forces used low radar signature composite speedboats to approach the giant supertankers under cover of darkness. They did not need heavy firepower to destroy them all. Simply attaching magnetic mines to the hulls or releasing underwater suicide drones was enough to inflict fatal breaches. The consequences appeared immediately. Millions of barrels of oil spilled into the sea, creating an environmental disaster and a colossal economic shock. Washington faced a financial nightmare. as global oil prices skyrocketed and maritime insurers refused to cover vessels passing through the Gulf. Even though the U.S. Navy possesses the most powerful fleet on the planet, it now operates under extreme strain. It has enough firepower to flatten a country, yet it struggles against Iran's ghost-like strikes targeting slow, cumbersome civilian tankers. Every sunken American oil tanker is not only a material loss, but also a deep cut into the credibility of the world's number one superpower. Tehran's message is clear and merciless. If Iran cannot export its oil because of sanctions and bombs, then the world will also struggle to run its economy on that energy. Mobile missile batteries hidden along Iran's thousands of kilometers of coastline, concealed in caves and mountain forests, continuously lock onto targets. When enemy ships enter range, saturation missile salvos are launched to overwhelm the target's defenses. American sailors on transport vessels live in a state of extreme anxiety, knowing death could strike at any moment from beneath the dark water or from behind the coastal mountains. Iran has turned its geographic advantage into a devastating economic weapon. They do not need to confront U.S. aircraft carriers directly. Simply cutting off energy supplies is enough to throw their opponents into chaos. The harsh reality is becoming clear. America drops bombs to destroy Iranian infrastructure, but Iran only needs to sink a few dozen oil tankers to shake the financial markets of New York and London. In this brutal game, Tehran's pragmatism and determination are gaining the upper hand. Washington's European allies are beginning to show cracks as energy prices surge while their own supply ships become targets at sea. The maritime graveyard continues to expand. The U.S. has been forced to send additional minesweepers and patrol forces, but the narrow and treacherous Strait of Hormuz makes it difficult for large vessels to operate effectively. Meanwhile, Iran's sea warriors continue to sow terror. America uses bombs to destroy the land, while Iran uses the ocean to bury Washington's arrogance. This energy war has only just begun, and its cascading consequences could shake the entire global economic order. Cities that once symbolized prosperity and pride now lie as cold concrete skeletons stretching from Iran to Israel and even to American bases abroad. So-called modern civilization has been crushed without mercy. This is the bitter price of arrogance, when leaders believe they can direct war like a game on a radar screen, only for reality to answer with vast fields of rubble and the complete paralysis of civilian infrastructure. In Iran, more than 1,000 coalition bombs targeted not only military sites, but also shattered the national power grid, plunging bright cities like Tehran and Isfahan into oppressive darkness. Oil refineries, giant transformer stations, and modern water treatment systems have become twisted heaps of scrap metal. A country of over 80 million people now struggles with electricity shortages, lack of clean water, disrupted communications, and nearly paralyzed public services. The U.S. and Israel used firepower to strike at the very foundations of their opponent's survival, but they forgot that those ruins themselves become the soil that nourishes the enduring spirit of resistance of a people accustomed to standing firm amid firestorms. The justice of war is always blind and merciless. Israel, a nation once proud of its supposedly impregnable infrastructure, has also begun to taste the consequences of the destructive storm. Iran's 800 ballistic missiles were not fired randomly into the sky. They struck directly at data centers, solar power plants in the desert, and especially Israel's strategic port system at Haifa. The port of Haifa, Israel's vital commercial gateway, is now engulfed in rolling smoke and flames. Giant cranes collapse like dominoes, illuminating the coastline with the fire of destruction. Both sides have thrown themselves into a collective game of suicide. While Washington helped destroy Iranian infrastructure, it simultaneously destabilized the global economic order. Supply chains have been severed and transport routes paralyzed. Each flattened power plant only fuels the determination of Iranian militia units. Each collapsed command building in Israel pushes society deeper into a mode of desperate survival. The destruction of infrastructure has led to the collapse of healthcare and education systems. Hospitals in Isfahan and Tel Aviv are overwhelmed as medical supplies and equipment are cut off by successive attacks. The scientific achievements in thousands of years old historical sites of ancient Persia now lie beneath piles of rubble and tank tracks. This is no longer merely a clash between armies, but a war aimed directly at the foundations of human existence. The arrogance of great powers has turned livable cities into wastelands that will take generations to recover. Look at the eerie silence hanging over strategic industrial zones. Automated production lines and technology centers that were once Israel's pride are now covered in dust and fragments from Iranian warheads. Meanwhile, Iran's oil and gas facilities, the pillars of its national economy, have been turned into vast seas of fire by American bombs. A vicious cycle of destruction with no escape has formed as each side wrecks the other's economy, dragging the entire Middle East into exhaustion. Day 38 of the war has coldly exposed the truth that in modern warfare, no one is truly safe. The line between military targets and civilian infrastructure has been erased. U.S. bases in Qatar and the UAE are also now facing the threat of long-range UAV attacks and cyber attacks from Tehran. The belief that the scale of war could be controlled has turned into a haunting nightmare as every attempt to save infrastructure is drowned by continuous barrages of fire. Cracked roads, collapsed bridges, and burning factories stand as living proof of the failure of imposed warfare thinking. America drops bombs to display its power. Iran responds with missiles to defend its honor. The end result is a devastated land. Arrogance has been paid for with the blood and ashes of both peoples. Israel exhausted under the Iranian firestorm, who will stand firm in the end. Do not be misled by boastful reports about the number of Iranian aircraft shot down. Behind the steel walls of the Ministry of Defense in Tel Aviv lies a cold reality of total exhaustion. The crisis is not only on the battlefield, but has penetrated deep into the economy and social psychology. Israel faces a harsh question of survival. It may win some localized battles, but it is gradually losing the long war of attrition against an opponent with persistent will and willingness to pay any price to keep fighting. The Iron Dome, David's sling and arrow systems, once hailed as technological wonders, have now become an enormous economic burden. A simple calculation tells the story. One Tamir interceptor missile from the Iron Dome costs between $5,000 and $8,000, while a cheap Iranian UAV costs only a few thousand. When Iran launches a wave of 1,000 suicide UAVs, Israel is forced to burn through hundreds of millions of dollars in just hours to keep its skies from collapsing. Israel's interceptor missile stockpiles are not infinite, and American production lines cannot keep up with the ferocious rate of consumption on the battlefield. Israel now risks running out of air defense ammunition and is forced to prioritize protecting military bases while many civilian areas are left at higher risk. The exhaustion is not limited to ammunition, it has seeped deeply into the economy. A nation built on high technology and services like Israel was not designed to endure a prolonged total war. Hundreds of thousands of reservists, engineers, doctors, and tech specialists have left their jobs to head to the front lines. Startups in Tel Aviv have shut down, foreign investment has fled the region, and the shekel has plunged sharply. Israel is consuming its own future to sustain the flames of war, and the price is the risk of deep economic recession. Social psychology has also shifted noticeably. Pride in the supposedly invincible IDF is gradually being replaced by constant anxiety as air raid sirens sound without pause day after day. When bomb shelters become familiar homes, the endurance of Israeli society is being tested to its limits. This is the invisible pressure that Tehran is exploiting to the fullest. Iran does not need to occupy Tel Aviv. It only needs to make life there suffocating and unstable, encouraging a reverse wave of migration to Europe and the United States. Israel now faces the danger of brain drain and deepening social fractures if the war drags on. As a result, international support for Israel has gradually weakened with each wave of strikes against Iran. The unconditional backing from Washington is creating cracks inside the United States and among Western allies. Pressure from anti-war movements and international criticism over the humanitarian disaster is pushing Israel into ever deeper isolation. Even close partners have begun questioning Netanyahu's escalation strategy. Israel may hold a firepower advantage, but after 38 days of continuous operations, it is losing steam. Attrition and mechanical failure rates are rising rapidly. Israel cannot sustain this giant war machine without a steady flow of supplies from the U.S. Yet, with sea lanes threatened by Iran and U.S. bases in the region within missile range, resupply is becoming increasingly difficult. Israel now resembles an athlete who expended all its energy in the first lap and is beginning to falter when the race has only just started. The stark reality is emerging. Israel has trapped itself within its own short-term victories. It may defeat proxy forces and bomb Iranian territory, but it cannot eliminate Tehran's missile resources. Every destroyed launch site is replaced by new underground systems. The war has no end in sight, and the longer it continues, the deeper Israel sinks into a spiral of exhaustion. Many military experts warn that if the conflict lasts another month, Israel's social welfare system could face a severe crisis. Behind the glow of precise airstrikes lies a nation trembling before the prospect of total exhaustion. The depletion of ammunition, economic pressure, and societal anxiety are forming the perfect storm threatening the very survival of this entity. Israel stands at a harsh crossroads: continue escalating and burn itself out in a war of attrition, or acknowledge the reality that firepower cannot purchase permanent peace. American superweapons bogged down by Iranian will, the Pentagon's helplessness laid bare. Look at what is happening inside the Pentagon and the White House. The United States entered this war with what it considered the pinnacle of military technology, from giant supercarriers to F-22 Raptors and Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking small targets from thousands of miles away. Yet a bitter paradox is now unfolding. This very overwhelming power is exposing a generational impasse. Washington is facing a truth it cannot easily dismiss. In a total confrontation with a resilient opponent like Iran, cutting-edge weapons cannot deliver a quick victory. They only lead it deeper into a strategic quagmire. America once prided itself on its find and destroy doctrine, believing that enough bombs and tight enough economic pressure would make any opponent collapse. But Iran is not a fragile, isolated nation that can be easily strangled. It is an ideological system backed by an asymmetric military network prepared over decades for the harshest scenarios. When the U.S. drops its giant bombs on Iran's underground bunkers, it is expending enormous resources for uncertain results. Each multi-million-dollar missile that destroys one cheap Iranian drone launcher becomes a clear failure in the economics of war. America is like using a precious sword to cut through thorns, and the blade is chipping away with every strike. The next layer of helplessness lies in the crumbling role of global policemen. Washington is committed to defending Israel at all costs, but that cost is now exceeding what American society can bear. When American oil tankers are attacked at sea and domestic fuel prices surge, domestic public opinion begins to waver. Any leader in Washington must confront a painful dilemma: continue sinking deeper into the Middle East to protect its ally and accept domestic economic risks, or withdraw and lose its superpower status. The confusion in recent Pentagon statements shows they have no clear plan once Iran decides on full-scale retaliation. Look at how Iran's allied forces are attacking U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. Cheap missiles and simple UAVs are forcing expensive Patriot systems to operate at overload levels. The U.S. finds itself in a no-win situation. If it escalates further, the risk of a wider regional war becomes real. But if it maintains the current level, American troops in the region become easy targets. It is the image of a giant trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer, only to wreck the entire room in the process. America's overconfidence in its technology is also being challenged by Iran. Incidents of U.S. UAVs being captured or Iranian missiles penetrating naval defenses have shaken the myth of the U.S. military's invincibility. American weapons are powerful, but they were designed for conventional wars between nations with clear infrastructure. When facing an Iran that hides in mountain caves, moves with high-speed boats, and attacks in swarms, those bulky weapon systems become far less effective. Helplessness is also evident in Washington gradually losing control over its own allies. When Israel unilaterally escalates strikes on sensitive targets, the U.S. is dragged along into a dangerous vortex from which it cannot easily escape. Washington appears to be following the rhythm set by its smaller ally rather than controlling the game. This is not only military helplessness, but also a failure of diplomatic strategy. The U.S. is no longer fully shaping the regional order. It has been reduced to a logistics supporter for an increasingly uncontrollable war. At the United Nations and other international forums, Washington's voice is steadily losing influence because it cannot offer any convincing peaceful solution beyond further increasing firepower. Meanwhile, the power vacuum created by American confusion is opening opportunities for other major powers, such as Russia and China, to expand their influence. The longer the war drags on, the more the U.S. reveals its fatigue in both resources and international credibility. Washington is lost in a strategic labyrinth of its own and its allies' making. Super weapons may devastate the surface, but they cannot break the spirit of resistance and the flexible calculations of an opponent like Iran. America may win on tactical screens, but it is steadily losing ground on the long-term geopolitical chessboard. After 38 days of great war, Iran stands firm while the old order of the U.S. and Israel shakes violently. On the Middle East battlefield right now, there is no clear image of a complete victor, only powers staring at each other across the smoking ruins of cities torn apart by the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. These three centers of power have been sucked into a ferocious vortex of confrontation where the greater the power, the heavier the price that must be paid. The world is witnessing a game in which the cost of victory can sometimes be even higher than defeat. Let's look first at Iran. The country has demonstrated extraordinary resilience by launching hundreds of missiles and thousands of UAVs that left its opponents stunned. Tehran has proven that when a people are driven into a corner, the will to resist can transform into fearsome strength. Yet, behind that steadfastness remains a harsh reality. Large parts of the country have been heavily devastated by bombs and missiles in just over 2 weeks. Energy infrastructure has been damaged, the national power grid is under severe strain, and an entire young generation is growing up in bomb shelters filled with the sound of sirens. Iran may not surrender on the battlefield, but it must shoulder an enormous burden of reconstruction. The pride felt when missiles strike their targets cannot immediately restore centuries old structures or bring peace back to the people. As for Israel, the fortress built on faith and military strength now shows clear cracks that no air defense shield can hide. The shortage of interceptor missiles is only the surface issue. Deeper still is the erosion of social confidence and economic structure. Israel has expended enormous resources to repel Iranian attacks, and the price is mounting economic pressure and growing social anxiety. The country is entering an uncertain future in which the concept of absolute safety that existed for decades is gradually fading. Tactical successes on the battlefield may bring short term advantages, but they cannot erase economic losses, diplomatic isolation, and fear of the next wave of attacks. Israel may win many individual battles, but it now faces a long term war that demands the endurance of the entire society. In America, the giant that entered the conflict with overwhelming military power has now been dragged deep into a strategic quagmire from which it is difficult to escape. Washington has spent tens of billions of dollars on this campaign, only to face a widening wave of anger across the Islamic world and a deadlock against Iran's asymmetric tactics. The credibility of the world's leading superpower is being tested as its tankers come under attack and military bases face constant threats. The U.S. is no longer fully shaping the regional order, but is instead struggling with the consequences of the very war it joined. Every bomb dropped on Iranian soil simultaneously undermines Washington's strategic position in the Middle East. Looking further ahead, all three sides are confronting the consequences of miscalculations and excessive self-confidence. America is losing influence, Israel is trading away its sense of security, and Iran is bearing heavy losses in infrastructure and economy. This war is unlikely to end with a glorious treaty or a grand signing ceremony. It may continue smoldering like underground fires, turning the Middle East into a zone of prolonged instability for many years. The clearest beneficiaries in this situation are probably the international arms corporations profiting from the escalation of conflict. 38 days of great war have passed like a violent film that humanity has been forced to watch. More than 1,000 bombs have revealed terrifying destructive power, thousands of missiles and UAVs have lit up the skies of war, and above all is the confusion of great powers that once believed they could control every conflict. In modern warfare, absolute winners are rare. There are only sides that pay the price sooner or later. The confrontation between the United States, Israel, and Iran shows that superior firepower cannot replace strategic vision, and excessive confidence often paves the way for unpredictable consequences. When bombs are used to flatten an opponent's present, one's own future may also be set ablaze. Day 38 ends with heavy casualty figures, but the scars this war leaves in human memory may last for generations. This is a game in which, regardless of the outcome, what remains are ruined cities and grieving families. The only thing the world can hope for is that those who hold the fate of nations soon recognize the limits of military power before this fire spreads even further. Thank you for accompanying U.S. Power Insight through the most tense moments of history. Your viewership is the motivation for us to continue analyzing and dissecting the hidden aspects of war with a realistic and straightforward perspective. If you found this useful, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep following the latest developments on the global geopolitical chessboard. See you in the next bulletins.